Imagine a psychedelic so powerful, it's been called 10 years of therapy in one night. We're talking about Ibogaine, a naturally occurring psychedelic alkaloid from an African shrub famous for its oneirophrenic, dreamlike journey and its potential to interrupt addictions in a single powerful dose.
In this scientific deep dive, we'll explore Ibogaine's history, how it works in the brain, its unique effects, potential therapeutic benefits, as well as risks, legal status, dosing, and other critical harm reduction tips. By the end, you're going to see why Ibogaine deserves both excitement, extreme excitement, and caution in the psychedelic world. So let's dive in.
Before we get going, I want to emphasize that this is separate from my role as a licensed psilocybin facilitator.
And this is separate from my future role in naturopathic medicine. To clarify, we never recommend the use of illegal substances on this channel.
Now getting to the history and background. Ibogaine comes from the root bark of Tabernanthe Iboga, a rainforest shrub indigenous to Central West Africa. For centuries, the Voiti spiritual tradition in Gabon and Cameroon has used Iboga root in initiation ceremonies, sometimes consuming massive amounts of bark to induce intense visionary states and spiritual rebirths. In rituals, the Iboga is referred to as sacred medicine that allows initiates to, quote, see the other world.
And Western awareness of Ibogaine and Iboga began in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, so the late 1800s and early 1900s, and was first isolated as an alkaloid in 1901 by some French researchers. By 1930s, small doses of Ibogaine actually made their way into French pharmacies under the brand name Lambarim, marketed as a mental and physical stimulant. Each tablet only contained about 4 to 8 milligrams of Ibogaine, so a pretty small dose, actually a tiny dose compared to psychedelic levels. It was actually popular among athletes after World War II, but was withdrawn in 1966 when France banned Ibogaine products altogether. So it was around for a while, though.
Yeah.
Being used kind of as a stimulant.
And it's pretty interesting that dosage is almost like a mini dose, or not a little bit above a microdose, maybe
above a microdose, yeah.
but a mini dose where you are getting some of those effects. In the 1960s, we see a turning point here. In 1962, a 19-year-old heroin user in New York named Howard Lotsof tried Ibogaine on a whim and made a stunning discovery. So after a 30-hour visionary ordeal, again, we're going to get into the duration of Ibogaine here.
Yeah.
So after a 30-hour visionary ordeal, Howard emerged with no heroin cravings or withdrawal symptoms. He gave Ibogaine to 6 other addict friends. 5 of them also immediately ceased drug use afterward. Realizing Ibogaine's anti-addictive potential, Howard spent the rest of his life campaigning for it. He even received a patent in 1985 for Ibogaine's use in treating chemical dependencies.
And despite promising anecdotes, Ibogaine ended up hitting legal roadblocks, which is pretty unfortunate. By the late 1960s, authorities classified it, along with LSD and other psychedelics, as a Schedule I substance, meaning officially no medical value and high abuse potential, which is a pretty questionable take, when we look at some of this research. Research was pretty sparse and underground, but the National Institute of Drug Abuse, NIDA, did fund early clinical studies in the early 1990s, but those concerns were halted in 1995 with concerns about safety.
And that's something we're going to get into a little bit here as well.
Yeah. And then pharmaceutical companies also stayed away after this, possibly hesitant due to the low profit margins of a single dose treatment. This is kind of speculative, but when we look around now, the treatment for opioid dependence is like opioid replacement therapy. And that does help a lot of people.
Yeah,
let it count that. Yeah, but it keeps people on a more safe opioid, and it makes money over time.
And the length of Ibogaine, the actual treatment period in which you'd have to be monitored, is a long period, which means that there's a lot of hours going into it. And oftentimes when you see something like that, the profit margins on things are lower because it takes a lot for another person to be in there facilitating and be with.
It's a huge medical ordeal too. Beyond just the facilitation, there's some medical things that have to be monitored. Absolutely, a lot of screening, and we will get into all of that.
Ibogaine usage continued to grow, but in these sort of grassroots groups formed in an underground network to provide Ibogaine detox to desperate people struggling with addiction. So by the early 2000s, independent clinics were operating in places like Mexico, Canada, even Europe, which were offering medically supervised Ibogaine treatments. Interest surged through anecdotal reports, documentaries, and a few other scientific publications. Enough that even the Time magazine and The Guardian ran stories on this promising and perilous drug. In short, Ibogaine went from an obscure ritual plant to a controversial beacon of hope in terms of addiction treatment, all in just a few decades.
Let's now dive into the mechanism of action. What is actually happening under the hood in the body, in the brain? It has a really complex pharmacology, Ibogaine. Extremely complex, actually, affecting many neurotransmitter systems all at once. Chemically, it's an indole alkaloid, a distant relative of tritines like psilocybin, but it doesn't act like a typical psychedelic. While Ibogaine may have some of its activity coming through 5-HT2A receptors, its activity is actually pretty weak, and studies using 5-HT2A blockers, so drugs that come in and actually block that receptor, do not fully eliminate Ibogaine's effects. So instead, studies suggest some of Ibogaine's subjective effects involve sigma receptor agonism, which is actually similar to DXM, the cough suppressant.
Yeah, which we will be doing a deep dive on. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and click this link above.
Yeah, that's a pretty underexplored and often hated on in the community for a good reason.
Yeah,
it's abused. It's a lot. Yeah, it is abused. Yeah, but there's some complex and potentially therapeutic value to DXM. So when we say that it's similar to DXM in that mechanism, there's actually some antidepressant effect that overlap with it. And we also see kappa opioid receptor agonism, which is similar to salvia, not divinorum. Salvinorin A from salvia divinorum also hits kappa opioid receptors, which is a very unusual mechanism. And many people think that salvia is the only drug that hits this, but it's actually part of Ibogaine's effects.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Really, honestly, a little bit surprising when doing this research that it does hit those kappa opioid receptors.
This could partly explain the one-of-a-kind dream-like hallucinations, which are very different from that classical psychedelic sort of presentation.
Beyond just the kappa opioid receptors, Ibogaine also antagonizes certain ion channels and other receptors. For example, it blocks NMDA receptors like dissociatives such as ketamine and nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, which might contribute to interrupting addiction pathways. Crucially, when Ibogaine is ingested, it is metabolized in the liver, primarily by CYP2D6 enzymes, into noribogaine, an active metabolite. Noribogaine acts as a potent serotonin reuptake inhibitor and a moderate kappa opioid agonist, and it stays in the body much longer than just Ibogaine. But weirdly, we also see a potent VMAT2 inhibition, which is very uncommon for drugs with SSRI activity, right? Usually we just see kind of one or the other going on here. And these two different mechanisms together provide a unique counterbalancing effect. While the exact role of this is not entirely clear, noribogaine may function like a long-lasting antidepressant and analgesic, prolonging Ibogaine's therapeutic effects.
Another fascinating aspect of Ibogaine's action is its impact on neurotrophic factors in the brain. Research at UCSF showed that Ibogaine dramatically increases levels of GDNF, which is glial cell line derived neurotrophic factor, in the brain's reward pathways. GDNF is basically like Miracle-Gro for certain neurons. In rodent studies, this surge in GDNF was directly linked to reduced drug-seeking behavior. In fact, scientists, when they blocked GDNF, Ibogaine's anti-addictive effect disappeared. So that's kind of suggesting that GDNF is critical for Ibogaine's anti-addictive effects. And this also suggests that Ibogaine reboots addiction circuitry partly by triggering brain growth factors that restore the normal neuron functioning.
Which, right, this is not necessarily the same, but similar in terms of like the how it's working with the reset properties due to other psychedelics. But so, for example, psilocybin might be like restarting the computer. Ibogaine is kind of like you unplug it for about 5 minutes and then plug it back in. So it's a total reset. Really, this large BDNF triggering going on.
Yeah, no, it's so complex. As we just described, we have the sigma receptor agonism, kappa opioid receptor agonism, NMDA receptor antagonism, some normal 5-HT2A psychedelic addicts. And we also saw the blocking of the nicotinic receptors. We have SSRI effects, literally the same.
Just this
antidepressant
wave coming over the brain of different things being hit. It's just like all over, just flooding the system.
It's pretty insane. This is by far the most complex psychedelic substance that we are aware of in the literature.
Yes.
And we'll get even into more of why it's complex with its duration. It's just insane. So it's not something that's just as simple as taking psilocybin.
Yes, there's definitely more mechanisms going on.
For sure. But yeah, with this GDNF, it's kind of like a unique molecular 1-2 punch. First, a flood of those receptor level effects, all those receptors we just listed off again, with the visions and the acute detox at the start, followed by longer term changes that may solidify these new addiction-free neural pathways. Now, if you're enjoying this video so far, please drop a like and subscribe for future content. We have so much more coming your way.
Yeah, and it really helps out with just growing this channel. Now diving into the effects on brain activity and connectivity. Given its many targets, Ibogaine profoundly alters brain activity. Animal studies have shown widespread changes in this neural metabolism after Ibogaine.
Yeah, for instance, in rats given Ibogaine alone, scientists observed increased glucose uptake into the brain, which is a sign of neural activity. And they saw this in the parietal, cingulate, and occipital cortices of the brain, as well as the cerebellum, which is part of the brainstem.
Exactly, which this all correlates with Ibogaine's intense sensory and hallucinogenic effects. The brain's vision and memory centers light up, corresponding to the vivid and dreamlike visions that users experience. Interestingly, when drug-dependent rats were treated with Ibogaine, there was a global reduction of activity in areas like the nucleus accumbens, locus coeruleus, and other regions tied to drug reward and withdrawal. In other words, Ibogaine seems to dampen the hyperactive addiction circuit while simultaneously stirring activity in other regions that generate visions and insights going on in this experience.
Yeah, so again, there's just so much happening here.
Yeah.
There's also evidence that Ibogaine can reset or normalize neural connectivity over time. So connection between these regions. And its effect on GDNF, for example, likely enhances this synaptic plasticity. So this is like the ability of those neurons to connect with each other. Maybe partly responsible for that increased connectivity between regions and in helping the brain forge new connections and break down these patterns of addiction and really just get into new habits in your life.
Yeah.
Some researchers describe Ibogaine's impact as a rewiring of the brain's default state. And although human neuroimaging studies are limited, thanks to all these legal hurdles, very unfortunate. Really.
Makes it super hard to do research. Luckily, at this point, we do have a lot of anecdotal experiences, and we're actually going to do a whole video just on a deep dive of anecdotal experiences with Ibogaine, coming from people with TBIs, right, traumatic brain injuries, ex-Navy SEALs, and even people with addictions like heroin.
Yeah, some pretty crazy anecdotal reports that we will get into. And these often align with this idea after an Ibogaine session, people feel like their brain has been rebooted. Like you said, like the computer's just clean. It's like the drive's been wiped. I mean, you still, your memories of wiped. It's not fully wiped.
Not fully wiped.
Like defragmented. You know, there's that term in computer. Computer science of like defragging the computer, cleaning it up.
So it runs faster.
You're ditching all the old folders that you don't need anymore.
Yeah. Doing a nice cleanup.
Yes.
And then this helps people kind of separate from the ingrained cues and triggers of addiction.
Mm-hmm. One caveat is that these brain changes can come at a physiological cost as well. Right? We see that high doses of Ibogaine can be neurotoxic in animals. Rodent studies noted degeneration of Purkinje cells in the cerebellum, right, which are neurons crucial for coordination at very large dosages. However, such damage has not been observed in the autopsies of human patients who took therapeutic doses under medical supervision. So we don't entirely know if this correlates with human research,
Right.
but we're just noting it in rodents. And again, there's not a direct comparison, right? The brain is different. We just often test on rodents because it's a little easier to test and then do that neural analysis afterwards.
Yeah. It seems like when you weigh the pros versus the cons of what's happening in the brain, it's probably a net positive for error with how well it's seeming to help people. But it's just, we wanted to note there's maybe some potential toxic effects if you go way too crazy with the dose.
And this is why, again, we're not recommending using Ibogaine, and especially good in a medical supervised environment.
Yeah.
But honestly, the bottom line is that Ibogaine's it is very powerful and it disrupts the brain's status quo, which is a double-edged sword, right? If it can break up pathological patterns, but it can also, demand essentially careful handling to avoid some of these collateral damages that may go on to just this total brain reset.
Yeah. It's an intense drug. It's really an intense experience.
Yeah.
And so let's move on into these research benefits of Ibogaine. It's most famous, of course, for the addiction treatment, as we've been kind of alluding to throughout, particularly for opioid dependence.
Yes.
So there's small clinical studies and observational reports that have consistently noted a single Ibogaine session, just literally one session, can reduce or even eliminate withdrawal symptoms and cravings for opioids.
In general, too. Yeah. We don't see as much of a duration like we sometimes see with some of the studies with, like psilocybin and alcohol.
Yeah. Like very lasting.
Yes.
Very durable effects. In one New Zealand study, patients with long-term opioid addiction received Ibogaine, and over 50% of them were able to sustain abstinence or significantly reduced use at that 12-month follow-up period.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, compared to many other treatments, that's massive.
Oh yeah, I mean your traditional treatments of addiction, right? Like these rehabilitation centers, the statistics are much lower.
Yeah.
Oftentimes you see something like a 3% from some of the best rehabilitation centers. And that's just an example of some, right? But it is much lower than this 50% after a 12-month follow-up.
Yeah.
Again, why psychedelic therapy and used for addiction can be so powerful.
Yeah, that's why we really need more resources to go towards research. You have to really solidify these findings. But the preliminary stuff here is super promising.
Mm-hmm.
And these individuals in that New Zealand study also showed improved mood and reduced depression scores after treatment, is kind of another side benefit that they were noting. So it's just kind of showing there's, even broader psychological effects going on, even though a lot of this research has been coming with addiction.
Yes. In addition to opioids, alcohol and stimulant addictions have also been targets for Ibogaine as well. So preclinical studies in rats showed Ibogaine curbed alcohol intake and even prevented relapse behavior. Similarly, early reports in humans suggest reductions in cocaine and nicotine cravings post-Ibogaine. Also, we see that an observational study of 33 people noted that after Ibogaine, which was the dosage delivered was 6 to 29 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, 25 patients had resolution of opioid withdrawal within 72 hours. And many self-reported less cravings for not just opioids, but also cocaine. So both of these.
Yeah.
It's as if Ibogaine was kind of doing this reset towards reward pathways too, right? Giving individuals a window of clarity to break out of the substance dependence in general, of all of them. Because a lot of these people,
who are struggling with addiction, it's not just one substance.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're going after, treating opioid dependence and we're using opioid replacement,
Yeah.
that's really not getting at the root of the problem. And what's so powerful about these psychedelic therapies is that it does seem like we're getting to the root and like helping people see in their own mind's eye, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Like, how can I get out of this loop?
It's not just a symptom solver.
Yeah.
Right. So all these things we talk about, it's not just for symptoms. It's also diving into, like Reed said, the source, right? Which may be trauma, which may be just an intense experience sometimes.
Yeah. And then another area of interest is mental health. So all this focus on addiction, but those side benefits we had mentioned of lifting of mood scores and depression scores. So there's not as much research here. It's not as extensively studied, but there are anecdotal cases of Ibogaine helping people with depression or trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Some people will describe a psychological defratting, kind of like I mentioned earlier, of the computer during the Ibogaine experience. And they confront past traumas or emotional patterns, which can really lead to therapeutic breakthroughs. And the evidence here, though, is mostly personal accounts.
Yes.
There's not as much clinical research, and there's caution that the benefits for mood disorders need systematic study,
Mm-hmm.
especially because Ibogaine does have some potential to cause mood swings. And we'll get up to more of that pretty soon here.
Yeah. Another big area of research that's seeing more attention is Ibogaine's ability to support people with traumatic brain injuries, especially veterans. So the graph from this study shows a massive decreases in disability score, largely sustained at the end of or at 1 month of follow-up. All right, we talk about Ibogaine for addiction, and we see that there's similarity with psilocybin. Again, with psilocybin treating for traumatic brain injuries, we see even a more profound effect with Ibogaine. And some of this, like we talked about, is maybe due to that entire reset.
And that GDNF,
Yeah, those really
getting neural,
absolutely. Yeah.
which is amazing.
And the GDNF is a huge force, right? With some of these traumatic brain injuries, parts of the brain may not be working as well. For example, with CTE, you actually see parts of the brain turning black, and those cells are essentially dying, and then it spreads throughout the brain. Something that you commonly see with NFL players and things.
So it's also worth noting that Ibogaine's addiction interruption effects might be able to be achieved by safer analogs in the future. We will get into some of these safety concerns in this video pretty soon. We just wanted to mention here, there's a non-psychoactive Ibogaine analog called 18MC or 18-methoxychloronaridine.
That's a mouthful. Anti-addictive effects.
In animals without Ibogaine's intense trip or the cardiac risks. And then there's also some other efforts. There's other non-psychoactive Ibogaine derivatives like tabernanthalog, also known as TBG. And these are both non-psychoactive analogs. And basically what they're trying to do is produce a non-psychedelic that still retains the GDNF effects, all of this brain growth effects.
Yeah.
It's not really sure, we're not sure, if this is going to fully replicate all of the benefits of Ibogaine, but it is just a really interesting area of research that a bunch of different pharmaceutical companies are working on right now.
And we'll be producing a video on tabernanthalog at some point, just specifically talking about that and some anecdotal experiences that we're happy to share.
Yep.
So this line of research owes its existence to Ibogaine's legacy, right? Essentially, scientists are trying to isolate the miracle molecule for addiction. Even if Ibogaine itself never becomes mainstream, it has opened up new frontiers in how we understand and potentially treat the neurobiology of addiction, right? This is really the most powerful in terms of anecdotal experiences for treating addiction.
Yeah.
Although there are really strong anecdotes with psilocybin, this carved the way even back in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, it's really a powerful compound, but not to be taken lightly. So we're about to get into these expected perceived effects of Ibogaine.
And make sure you hang around for these side effects as well, because that's an important safety topic of the video. Feel free to click click the link below too if you want to just jump there.
You jump to that chapter in the video. But yeah, it's super important piece of side effects. But so yeah, what is an Ibogaine experience actually like subjectively? Like what are people going through when they're under the influence of Ibogaine? Users often divide it into two distinct phases. So the first is the visionary phase, an intense 4 to 8 hour stretch of vivid hallucinations and this dreamlike immersion. And during this phase, people commonly report seeing like elaborate scenes from their past, like reliving real memories, as if like watching a film of their life or long forgotten memories just unfolding before them. Really interesting reports here. And again, we'll have some videos going into some of these reports directly.
Pretty powerful.
Yeah, it's not the free-flowing kaleidoscope of visuals from an LSD that you're getting with Ibogaine. It tends to be more structured visions, kind of like a visionary quest. And these tend to be more structured and autobiographical. So like relating to your own life a little bit more. And this term, oneirophrenic or dreamlike, is pretty fitting here. I didn't even know about this term until reading about Ibogaine. It's pretty weird, but dreamlike is kind of one of the best ways to describe it. You may feel conscious, but completely absorbed in your own inner movie. And even auditory hallucinations, like hearing voices or sounds from memory, are also pretty frequent here. And this phase can be physically rough as well. And the nausea and vomiting are going to be super common in this really visionary phase. Many people will just have to lie down, eyes closed. That's really what you kind of have to do to avoid dizziness and ataxia, which is difficulty with coordination. Essentially, journeying internally through these intense imagery while their body is purging.
And some of this purging could also be contributing to some of the total reset going on. Right, we see purging in a lot of psychedelic therapy. Ayahuasca is really huge with the purging idea. So is psilocybin actually can be as well. And it's not just through throwing up, right? It's through this body just releasing.
Sometimes releasing mucus or tears, or sometimes you have to go have a bowel movement. Yeah, which is, it can be kind of annoying or while you're out of cannabis to have to take care of these body's urges. But it's actually sometimes seen as part of that cleansing effect.
Something that we normally aren't loving in our daily life.
Yeah,
usually. Some people did.
Sometimes it can feel like a whole mission when you're having to go relieve those. Just want to leave.
Really releasing. Yeah. So after this initial phase comes the introspective phase, which can last 24 to 36 hours or more. Or we can even see this up to 48 hours. In this period, the vivid visuals fade a little bit and you return to a more normal waking consciousness, but you're left to just reflect deeply on what you just witnessed. People often experience hours of profound introspection, processing personal issues, insights, and emotions stirred up by the kind of visionary onslaught that's going on here. However, this phase isn't exactly pleasant recovery, right? Residual effects linger, such as insomnia is common, along with exhaustion, muscle soreness, and emotional volatility. So it's just good to really take your time with this. It's kind of like the processing phase, or this phase where you're returning a little bit, and it's just good to take it slow. Again, why usually these Ibogaine type clinics in other countries, you're usually there for about a week.
Yeah.
So that way you can get through some of these common side effects and common experiences safely.
Overall, an Ibogaine journey is often described as difficult, but potentially very transformative. It's not a recreational high in the sense that some of these other psychedelics can be. There's typically not euphoria. Instead, users might spend long stretches of time in like a trance or a semi-dream-like state, confronted with their personal truths, which can be really enlightening, and you could have some euphoria there for sure, or it could be pretty troublesome, harrowing, and like really make you look at your life in a different way, and that could be challenging.
It takes courage to do this.
Absolutely.
And you can do it, right? So if you're sitting there after all the things we just went through and you sound like, oh, that's a lot. The pros right, of this research, of doing it safely can really outweigh some of these challenges. And it's like you're facing a couple, quite a few hours maybe of challenge, but then maybe some freedoms for really long-term times.
Yeah. And now getting into some of these physical side effects, you can expect coordination loss, tremors, and nausea during the acute phase, and even lingering beyond that. Most commonly, though, in the earlier part of the trip.
Yeah.
And it's common to need assistance to walk or to use the bathroom. And many people are vomiting multiple times. And this, like we said, is that purge phase or detoxification. Time distortion is also extreme. So those 24 to 36 hours can feel like an eternity.
Can also feel shorter too, right? Know that time dissolution, when this goes on, it often feels some points are feeling really long, some points are feeling really short. So that 36 hours could also feel a lot shorter.
Right.
Could also feel like it's stretched a little bit.
Yeah. Really varies individual to individual.
Yeah.
But by the end of this, people often feel cleansed, fragile, and clear-headed, describing a sense that they've lived through 1,000 dreams or emerged with a new perspective. But again, this comes with a serious strain on the mind and the body, which is why it's really critical you have a control setting for safety. And yeah,
I do know people that have gone through this with traumatic brain injuries and, really severe traumatic brain injuries, something where psilocybin, they couldn't really do or didn't feel comfortable, and they went to this, which is maybe more intense.
Yeah.
But afterwards really had a significant change and really profound effects. So it can be something that really helps people.
Yeah. And it's often probably not that first line recommendation.
Yeah. Sometimes trying some things like psilocybin, is really solid too. So psilocybin therapy, for example.
Ibogaine may be, I don't want to say the last resort, but it may be later on your list of psychedelic therapy efforts when things aren't working.
It's also more expensive than trying like ketamine therapy, psilocybin therapy. Because of this long duration, it's usually significant more cost.
Yeah. And you have to go to a different country.
Mm-hmm.
Whole lot of costs involved and risks, which we're about to dive into here.
Now getting into the risks and side effects. We see Ibogaine's powerful effects do come with some significant risks. So first and foremost, there are these cardiovascular risks. Ibogaine can prolong the QT interval, which is an electronic measure in the heart, which in some cases leads to serious arrhythmias like torsade de pointe. In plain terms, it can really throw off the heart's rhythm. And patients typically experience a drop in heart rate and blood pressure early on in the experience, but followed by possibly spikes in that blood pressure as well. So if someone has an underlying heart condition, sadly, there is some serious risk here, and there have been fatalities with Ibogaine. And a review found 19 deaths linked to Ibogaine between 1990 and 2008, many involving cardiac arrest or arrhythmias. So experts estimate that the risk of death might be around 1 in 300 treatments, which is not negligible. And most of these cases were in unsupervised or non-medical settings. This is why medical screenings, specifically before you go through this, and monitoring are absolutely critical if you're going to do Ibogaine. There is at least one study showing that concurrent administration of IV magnesium, as well as oral and IV antioxidants, may help reduce some of this risk of cardiac abnormalities going on here.
Yeah, we don't want to say that this concurrent use of magnesium and antioxidants fully eliminates the risk. We do not have the data to say that, yet there's some preliminary evidence that in people too, that this does help. Magnesium tends to help regulate cardiac electrical signaling. Generally is very good for cardiovascular health, magnesium, as well as these antioxidant effects. So super interesting, and we'd love to dive more into that. But this really involves a medical setting, because IV administration of magnesium, you're not going to be doing that yourself.
Definitely.
That's an infusion into the bloodstream.
All of this, definitely go see a medical professional and follow their medical advice.
Yeah. Again, expensive and intense. So aside from these hard issues, which are really the biggest reason with Ibogaine that we know of, the side effects acutely can be really intense. We mentioned that ataxia, which is the difficulty coordinating your movements. There can be tremors, which are like shaking, and also the profound nausea and vomiting right out, like shortly after dosing. People can temporarily become unresponsive or delirious at the peak too. And there's also a risk of seizures because Ibogaine does lower the seizure threshold, especially if it's taken alongside other substances.
Yes, and we do see, again, this in a medical setting, like at some of these current clinically monitored retreats. There's there's potentially a lot less of these side effects going on.
Yes.
So just pointing that out, right, again, why it's important to go and do this in a very legal or at least a very safe setting.
Yeah. And with all of these potential side effects, you can really see the picture of if somebody were to try to do this without the medical setting.
Yeah.
It could be a recipe for disaster.
The duration alone.
Yeah.
And dizziness, like wandering around, not a good thing.
Not a good thing at all. Could fall, hurt yourself. There's a whole lot of logistical concerns aside from the heart risk as well.
But it is an amazing research, and I look forward to when this is brought into the United States as a potential for treating some addiction.
Done with these things like the IV magnesium and any protective measures we can bring. We want to make exactly once this can come into common practice. There have to be a lot of precautions, but it can help a lot of people. And then there is another risk of respiratory depression if someone has opioids or depressants in their system. Yeah, so super critical. And a lot of people are coming in here for addiction that they have to be tapered off or like in a cold turkey from their opioid use before Ibogaine. They can't actively have these in their system. And that's where a lot of these risks and deaths have probably come from. Because Ibogaine's interaction can suppress breathing. In fact, toxicology reports from the fatalities often show that the person who passed some of these fatalities that we've talked about, the person had taken opioids or alcohol. And this mix can really lead to that lethal synergy. Vomiting while sedated or fully unconscious almost, leading to aspiration or choking on your vomit and unfortunately passing away. So
and now getting into some of those psychological risks as well. There is a little bit going on here. Although Ibogaine isn't known to cause psychosis in a classic sense, the experience can be traumatizing or destabilizing for some. Image confronting intenseness, personal trauma, and hallucinations that can stir up lingering anxiety or even depression. There have been reports of post-Ibogaine depression, also known as like the gray days, and even a few cases of extended mania lasting days to weeks. If someone has a history of bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, Ibogaine could potentially aggravate those conditions. So, in summary, the risks range from short-term physical crises, such as the heart failures and seizures, to subacute mental health swings. Ibogaine's margin of safety is narrow, so it must be approached with the utmost care while doing it. Most experts agree without medical supervision and preparation, the dangers, they might outweigh the benefits. And again, on the opposite side too, that in these supervised settings, the dangers are just crushed by the benefits.
Yes. So I would say that as well.
Yeah.
But given all these risks, it's not a huge surprise that Ibogaine's legal status is highly restrictive in many countries. In the United States, Ibogaine is a Schedule I, as we said, since 1970, making it completely illegal to possess or distribute at the federal level. So this is not something you can legally acquire or sell. And unlike psilocybin or ayahuasca, Ibogaine hasn't been one that's benefited much from the recent decriminalization movements across the country.
And there's no states where it's legal either. Like here in Oregon, psilocybin therapy is legal. Ibogaine is sadly not legal anywhere in the United States.
Yeah, and there's been movements to have that arise. For instance, in Kentucky, really sad story of it almost made it through, and somebody up top shut it down when it was really close to going through for the opioid dependence.
Yeah,
and it could have helped a lot of people. Could be helping other people right now. The DEA does actively monitor for clandestine Ibogaine clinics, but an underground network persists.
Yeah.
So it is possible that there's some Ibogaine clinics even within the U.S., which is illegal. But there's probably some people doing that. Again, internationally, out of country is where these legal Ibogaine clinics happen. And that's where, if you are going to pursue this as a treatment, go to the ones where it's legal, where it's in a medical setting.
Exactly, yeah. So some of these countries that have embraced a medical approach are, for instance, New Zealand, which made Ibogaine prescription medicine in 2009, allowing licensed doctors to administer it to patients, even though it's not formally approved. Brazil and South Africa have also legalized Ibogaine treatment for clinical settings. Canada classified Ibogaine as prescription drug in 2017, which means it's legal to possess with a doctor's oversight. On the other hand, several European countries have strictly prohibited it. For example, Sweden and Norway list Ibogaine as a Schedule 1 narcotic, and the UK bans it under their Psychoactive Substances Act.
Yeah.
Interestingly, Mexico has no specific laws against Ibogaine. It's unregulated there, which is why Mexico hosts many Ibogaine clinics serving international clients. Yeah, which is why many U.S. citizens, for example, looking for Ibogaine treatments go down to Mexico. Costa Rica and Bahamas similarly have become destinations for Ibogaine retreats in a legal kind of gray zone.
Yeah. And it really may take larger clinical trials and development maybe of these safer analogs to eliminate that cardiac risk before Ibogaine gains wide legal acceptance.
Yeah.
For now, anyone seeking Ibogaine therapy has to travel abroad or find those underground providers, which we highly discourage, both of which can carry like legal or safety challenges, because it is true that some of these international clinics aren't doing all the medical precautions. So important to do your research very, very thoroughly on this stuff.
So now diving into the administration, dosing, duration, and half-life of Ibogaine from Iboga itself, right? In a medical context, Ibogaine is typically administered orally, either as capsules or Ibogaine hydrochloride, which is a purified form, or as the ground Iboga root bark itself. So the dosing can vary quite a bit based on the goal as well. So for opioid detox, providers often use kind of a flood dose, which is calculated by body weight, usually around 15 to 20 milligrams per kilogram of body weight of Ibogaine hydrochloride. For a 70 kilogram person, this is around a gram. So lower doses, more like 5 to 10 milligrams per kilogram, might be used for milder treatments or psychospiritual sessions. It's common to give a small test dose first to gauge the sensitivity and rule out any acute adverse reactions, which is then followed by the full dose after a few hours. When Ibogaine is given as a root bark, the dosing is less precise because the bark contains anywhere from like 5 to 6% Ibogaine, plus other alkaloids might be playing a role here too. In Bwiti ceremonies, they often talk in grams of bark, such as 20 to 30 grams of root shavings, which is a massive amount that equates to, this kind of medical flood dose or beyond.
Yeah. So once it's ingested, Ibogaine is slow to kick in. The users usually start to feel effects after 30 minutes to 3 hours of dosing. So a big waiting game here. And that delay can be nerve-wracking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can be nerve-wracking, right? You're kind of waiting, but also you know that it's only going to take you kind of, again, where you can go. You're in a safe place if you're using it, hopefully. And so that should be reassuring during this time.
Yeah, and as long as people know what they're getting into, that waiting period, it's all good. People often lie down, waiting, and then boom, it hits.
And then you're taking off into that first phase.
Yeah, and this peak of the experience, that intense visionary phase that we talked about, can last 8 to 12 hours even. Sometimes that acute phase can last 18 hours in the heavier doses. So it really does depend Yeah, and vary person to person because a lot of that's coming from the nor-ibogaine metabolite of ibogaine. And that metabolism through CYP2D6, like we talked about, is it's very variable between different people. There's some research showing major differences in metabolism. So that could explain a lot of this difference in dosing or difference in effects.
Yeah.
And then residual effects can persist for days. Many people report not being able to sleep for 24 to 36 hours post-dose or even more. And as that introspective phase unfolds and slowly tapers out, then people can finally sleep.
It is worth stating here too, some people do sleep okay after the journey. It's not always where they're going to 2 or 2.5 days without sleep, but that is something that's talked about. So we just wanted to highlight that.
And then all around, from point of ingestion to feeling fully back to baseline can be like 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
Because there's some aftermath effects too, which makes ibogaine really one of the longest acting psychedelics.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically a marathon for the mind and the body.
Yeah. And the pharmacokinetics explain some of this drawn out course. So ibogaine itself actually has a pretty moderate half-life, around 4 to 7 hours in humans, meaning that the parent drug ibogaine is largely cleared within a day. But its metabolite nor-ibogaine sticks around much longer. And studies have shown that nor-ibogaine's half-life is about 28 to 49 hours. Nor-ibogaine levels in the blood often exceed ibogaine's and can be detected for days after a single dose. The metabolite continues to exert effects like blunting withdrawal symptoms and affecting mood during this post-trip period. So, additionally, ibogaine is a lipophilic and may sequester in the fat tissue and leaching out over time as nor-ibogaine, just as nor-ibogaine. So again, the fat is kind of holding on to some of this and it's leaching out over time, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
All this means is that even after the subjective journey ends, biologically, you're not necessarily off the ride yet, right? The afterglow or lingering effects can involve some of that insomnia, lower appetite, and kind of a strange mix of fatigue and alertness for a couple of days. Again, some of this varies per experience and per person.
Yeah, and some of that mix of fatigue and alertness is through all these complex mechanisms we described earlier.
Yes.
It's just such a complex substance, and it can be strange. Just really a lot of strange feelings, a mix of energy and tiredness. But because of this long duration, ibogaine sessions are usually done in a 24 to 72 hour clinical stay. As you mentioned, we'll have to stay there for a while with medical monitoring. So medical teams have to monitor vital signs and continuously throughout the whole peak. Patients remain in a bed or in a comfortable setting, some kind of lying down position or maybe a reclined chair. So very different from a pretty short psilocybin session. Relatively short. I don't want to say psilocybin is short because it definitely could feel really long. Yeah, but relative to ibogaine is short.
Definitely.
And so ibogaine's having you here for an overnight ordeal, probably multiple nights, if we're being completely realistic.
Usually about a week.
Yeah.
Or at least a week even.
Yeah. Because a lot of these clinics will do maybe other practices, maybe meditations, some yoga, something throughout the week too to help integrate, make sure people are recovering and integrate it back into their normal life afterwards. Due to the multi-day metabolic half-life of these substances we just talked about, repeat dosing is spaced out. So clinics have to wait probably at least a week or even months before considering another treatment, if at all. It's not that common to do multiple doses. Sometimes this does need to happen. But ibogaine isn't something you really redose or binge on. Tolerance doesn't develop in that recreational way. And in fact, many people don't have the desire to repeat it frequently and be very uncommon.
Yeah, because it's work, what you're going through. It's not necessarily just play.
Yeah, it's that therapeutic and spiritual work, really. So in summary, dosing is weight-based, person to person, that's going to vary. And it's carefully measured and carefully delivered. Onset is slow, and the peak is marathon-like. So the substance life in your body is long, requiring patience, supervision, and recovery time.
Yeah, now diving right into the harm reduction and variability in Ibogaine use. If you're considering Ibogaine, this is a very important section to listen to. Harm reduction is absolutely vital. So this is not a casual psychedelic you take at a music festival or alone in your bedroom. The difference between a life-changing healing experience and a medical emergency comes down to proper precautions. First, medical screening is a must. In EKG, should check the heart QT interval. Liver enzyme tests and overall physical and psychological exams by professionals should be pursued. Ibogaine has been associated with life-threatening heart complications like arrhythmias, so trained medical supervision is non-negotiable with this. A defibrillator and cardiac drugs should be on hand during treatment, although if you've been pre-screened, not necessarily something that you should worry about. All right, but again, that screening is extremely important. And the provider should be able to handle any emergency that might go on. If a clinic doesn't monitor heart rate, blood pressure, etc., that's really a huge red flag with this.
Yes. And then additionally, avoid drug interactions like the plague. You really do not want any other substances in your system, and especially opioids. And you take Ibogaine. Many of these fatalities, as we mentioned, happened when people had methadone, heroin, alcohol, or benzodiazepines in their body at treatment time.
Yeah.
So super critical there to not be mixing anything. A reputable provider will require you to taper off certain meds and be in with a mild withdrawal period. So for those opioid patients, before administering Ibogaine, it might be kind of uncomfortable. You're going to be in withdrawal when you start this intense quest. So it's really not something to be taken lightly. It's intense.
Yes.
Combining Ibogaine with stimulants or antidepressants can also be dangerous. As we mentioned earlier, there's SSRI activity from Ibogaine. Mixing it with an SSRI you're already taking might not be the best thing.
Really important to disclose everything that you are currently taking to your provider of Ibogaine if you go through this process.
Yeah, so these medications like SSRIs or antipsychotics might need to be paused, but that should only be done with medical guidance, because stopping those does have its own risks, for sure.
Definitely. And third, understand that there is individual variability. People's reaction to Ibogaine can differ widely based on body weight, metabolism, so that CYP2D6 genetic differences, and personal sensitivity in general. So dosing should start slow, right, and grow. Reputable clinics often administer an initial test dose of something like 1 to 2 milligrams per kilogram of body weight and observe the response before giving the full flood dose. Never assume that you can handle Ibogaine because you handled other psychedelics. Like, this isn't LSD, this isn't psilocybin or MDMA, and always err on the side of caution with dosage.
And next, set and setting are crucial, just as with any psychedelic, but even more so here.
Because it's so long. You're going to be in this environment for a very long time.
The environment should be calming, secure, and free of hazards. You could be stumbling or immobile for hours.
Yeah.
And having that compassionate sitter or therapist, and even a medical professional in these settings to help you integrate the experience afterwards is also important. Ibogaine can really pull up a lot of intense psychological content that needs processing. Without integration, some of those insights are unresolved feelings can fade, or worse, can leave you unsettled.
Yeah. Psychedelic trauma is a thing, so you want to make sure that you go through a proper integration of this experience, and otherwise it could leave you unsettled, right? It's that difference between extreme benefit to challenge. Finally, be aware of post-treatment care. Ibogaine can give a miraculous window of relief, like a person addicted to heroin user, suddenly having zero withdrawal. But that window must be used wisely. So follow-up therapy, support groups, lifestyle changes, these are key to making the most of the Ibogaine reset that's going on here. Many experts warn that Ibogaine is not a standalone cure, much like other psychedelics. Relapse can happen if the person goes back to the same environment without support. The experience might interrupt addiction, but recovery is a journey that continues after this flood that Ibogaine presents.
Yes. So, in summary, respect the variability and potency of the substance. With proper screening, a controlled setting, and the aftercare, Ibogaine's benefits can potentially be harnessed way more safely.
Yes.
Neglect these precautions, and the variability can turn deadly. We don't want to hammer this in too much, but do remember that 1 in 300 statistic. It's not a set in stone number.
So go to a clinic.
Go to a clinic. Yeah, you don't want to be that.
Yeah.
So if Ibogaine is ever in your path, approach it with reverence, knowledge, and caution. Done responsibly, it can be really a profound healer, but done recklessly, it's not forgiving.
Yeah. That's our deep dive into Ibogaine. It's a substance that defies easy categorization, right? It's a powerful psychedelic, an neurogen, a potential addiction interrupter, and a medical risk all in one. So we hope this gives you a clear, balanced look at its promise and its perils. Again, this is something that could be one of those legitimate, life-changing, and beneficial experiences, especially done in the right way.
Yes. As always, stay safe and informed. If you found this interesting, please check out our other episodes on psychedelics, and please tap those like and subscribe buttons. It really helps our channel grow. Ibogaine may not be as famous as LSD or psilocybin, but it's certainly made a huge impact. Thank you so much for listening, and as always,
Elevate your trip.